The Woodshop makes its living making furniture. We do a lot of work in the commercial world, hospitality sites, restaurants. We do a lot of work in the home market, beds and tables and chairs, and a lot of bar stools, several hundred a month.
What I love about your wood shop is that you use reclaimed wood.
Yeah, we make anything and everything. So we do a great deal of work with like live edge slabs, or somebody just wants a new walnut countertop or something like that. The reclaimed lumber comes to us in a lot of different ways. Oftentimes we're involved with a teardown, ourselves. It is the kind of thing where we, in the past, often had to go out on the hunt for those kind of things. I've had numerous clients who knew that they wanted, an old farm table or whatever else, and then come in and looked at what we had going on and said, gee, we used to have some lumber like that. What is that? And I was like, well, that's Wormy chestnut. Oh, that's really handsome. We had a whole barn full of that at one point. I was like, oh, really? What'd you do with it? Oh, it was in the way and we burnt it down. And I was like, how big was that barn actually? Oh, 60 feet like this and 40 feet like that. It's like, yeah, that was probably about $20,000, $30,000 worth of lumber. I'm really sorry you burnt that down. Maybe next time you'll call me. And then we have a number of people in the local area who literally do this for a living, where they're finding and dismantling old structures and then bringing the lumber to us, and we're buying it from them as well.
So that's what you found yourself doing when suddenly you were asked to make a coffin.
That all began with my mom, actually. My grandmother had been declining for a while, and she was living at home with my parents. And they knew, the end wasn't necessarily tomorrow, but it was imminent enough that something, needed to be done and planned and thought about. And my mom asked me, would you like to build the casket? And she wanted to make sure that I had, enough time to do that. She sort of got that ball rolling, several months before my grandmother actually passed. You have these moments, everybody does, where something that seemed small or whatever makes a change in your life, a substantial one, a point that you can look back at and say, wow, things were really different from that point forward. And the experience of doing my grandmother's casket became one of those moments. It was a completely different way of participating in the death of a loved one than I had ever experienced up to that point. And it wasn't like I had never been involved in it before. I had just never been involved in it in that way, and had never thought about it that way, and had really no expectation that I was going to be participating in something that would fundamentally alter my life.
That's the thing that I have been thinking a lot about this, and realizing just the sadness and how it's kind of backwards, how this person that you've lived with, to be so close to them and then at the very end not have anything. You want to be able to have some kind of gesture of saying, I love you and I care for you, and your body is gone, your soul is in heaven, but I still want to do something to show my love and care for you. My mom, when she had died, we were in the hospital with her for a couple of hours, but then we had to leave before her body was taken away, and that was the last time I saw her. And this whole idea that a stranger comes and takes them, washes them, puts them in these clothes, puts makeup on there. And I walked up to her, and her hair was not even part of the way that she normally does. I was like, this is not you, Mom. And then she's lying in this casket. To me, it looked like it was plastic. And it's just so not who my mom was at all. I mean, she was so alive, so vibrant, had thousands of stories to tell, and she was a great storyteller. And then when you made the casket for her, it was made out of wood. I knew that you worked with reclaimed wood, and for me it was just so incredible because, well, the reason why I love trees is I feel like they're just these silent bystanders who watch life go by. They see all these stories that happen, the people that go by and the houses that are built and torn down, and just one story after the next. And then they're cut down, and then maybe a barn is built, and then they see a whole nother story, and it's just gathering all this life around them. And then now it's a coffin. And I was like, this is alive. This has the stories. This is my mom. This is where she is. And that's the neat thing, is that how you were saying that each one is made particularly for that person because there's a story behind each person. And so that coffin represents the story that they lived.
So this past summer, there was a young man locally who died. They had found out the day after their fourth child was born that he had an aggressive cancer, and 6 months later he was dead. And one of his last requests was that Strong Oaks would make his casket. His wife came and had said that that was one of his last requests, and would his boys be allowed to help. And they were 8 and 10. Our current modern mindset would have been by default to excise those children from this thing that's just too big, too scary, too terrifying, too something, and not only not allowed them to participate, but tried in some fashion to insulate them or distract them or whatever else. I so admired the courage, particularly of that young woman who had just lost her husband, had a 6-month-old on her hands, and was still willing to bring her 2 young boys over here. The foresight to recognize that this was real and true. They had lost their father. They were going to have to find a way to grow up without him physically present in their lives. And yet there was no sense trying to flee from that pain or that absence, and that any attempt to do so would be ultimately foolish, because it would simply catch up with them in a worse way, in a more painful way, in a more destructive way later in their life. It was particularly challenging for me. It was shortly after I had buried my nephew. I was already kind of emotionally raw, but they taught me so much. They were so uniformly convinced of the resurrection. Of course they were sad, but they were not overborne. They had nothing that felt like or tasted like despair. They were working for their dad. Everything was very, very particular for them. So we would just march around in the shop, and we would go out to the lumber yard, and we would look through the different boards, and they would say, yeah, those are for my dad. No, not that one. No, that one won't work. Oh, this is a good one. We picked out all the lumber, and we cut that apart, and we put on their earmuffs, and they would sand, for hours. They were here with me for 2 full days, and so pleased with what they had done. That'll be nice for Dad. He'd be proud of that. And on the 3rd day, I had sent them home with several small cut-offs of wood that were leftovers from the lumber that we had used on his casket. They had spent that evening drawing pictures. They brought them back, and I asked them, where did they want to put them? Well, we're going to put them right there on the inside of the lid where they'll be the first thing he sees. They will be the first thing he sees when he wakes up. I look forward to seeing what those young men turn out to be.
A father's job is to take care of his family, protect his family, and then teach his sons how to become men who will then turn and take care of their families. And in this moment, they were given the opportunity to take care of their dad, to step up and experience what it's like to give back to their dad, because usually you don't give back to your dad until you're grown up. You've also helped provide a proper burial for miscarriages as well.
There is this hidden suffering in the lives of many of the women in our community who endure a miscarriage, which is something that society has a difficult time recognizing. And I think there is a definite lack of sympathy and compassion and understanding, just understanding. And like I said, I feel like a great deal of that has to do with our culture at large and this accommodation that we've made with abortion. And so we have tried to do whatever we can, whenever we can, to recognize, if even we're the only ones, to recognize that yes, you have lost a child, and we grieve for you and grieve with you as much as if, you know, that was your 2-year-old or your newborn infant that you lost. And we want to do something individual and unique and purposeful for you as well. Even that's all it is, just to recognize that you're sad and that you hurt because of what you have lost in this circumstance. And so to have this little box, even some of them literally have hung on to the physical remains of their dead child, and it has become a place, you know, a casket for that baby that they can then bury and grieve over and hopefully move on. For those who haven't had that experience, it is at least a place that they can put those memories, that they can focus on to shed perhaps, or go through in a more meaningful way the sorrow and the grief and the loss that has been, you know, brought into their lives, and to hopefully find healing and a path forward inside of that.
The fact that these women are reaching out and they're being heard by Tom, by someone who says, your pain is real, hold on a second, I have something for you. That it won't make the pain go away, but you will have an opportunity of acknowledging what happened.
It is a miracle that there are some who get far enough along in the grieving process to actually acknowledge what they have lost and to accept someone else's willingness to grieve with them.
How do women know how to reach out?
It has largely been passed by word of mouth. There is a Facebook page up about it, and that has been widely disseminated, but mostly it's been passed around by word of mouth from one woman to another.
You take the time out of beautiful material to make a beautiful little coffin for a miscarried baby. It's because that baby has value and respect, the same value and respect as an 80-year-old or as a 36-year-old or as a 4-year-old or any of them. And it's so easy for us to forget, just because we can't see it, that no, this baby deserves the time for all of us to go. And even if, you know, if you don't have the remains of the miscarried baby, to say, we're going to take a moment and symbolically we're going to bury this baby. And then I think it's a lot easier to have compassion on a woman who's gone through miscarriage and say, oh yeah, you're still sad. That's totally understandable, because we have visibly, we all together acknowledge that this happened. And it's sad because a lot of women also feel like they can't talk about their miscarriages.
It is a small and very tiny thing that we are doing, but it is in its own way an antidote to the abortion mentality. If something has happened to this woman who miscarried, if she lost a child, then the woman who is having an abortion has also had that same thing. We're trying to make more visible the connection that literally is there, but which our society doesn't want to recognize. We are not really interested as a society in acknowledging or talking about death. We're disconnected from our own past, and we're certainly disconnected from eternity in the way that we tend to live. And death is an uncomfortable reality. It is one of the primary reasons why we're typically open to accepting the truths of religion, is because we have had an experience or a notion of our own mortality, and the world at large is keeping up a kind of noise and busyness that wants to separate us from that awareness of our mortality. We would like to think that the train ride is never going to end, that it's going to be perpetually fun and exciting, and we won't have to pay any fee when we get to the end of it, which isn't coming anyway. And so many people happen to find us, on the website or something like that, and call us up and they just pay to have a casket built. We have a long conversation with them, work out, how we can make that as personal to them and to their family and to the one that they love who has passed as we possibly can. Other times someone's near enough or able to come over and actually work with us shoulder to shoulder, making this thing for someone who was, special to them. Anything to allow each person who is grieving to have some last way of saying something to this person that they loved and forging a better connection with them into eternity. When we make one of these caskets, I want them to be moved. I want them to look at it and say, there it is. That's my mom. Like, that was for her to know that they are recognized, they are loved, you are loved, and to have them be able to express their grief in a way that leads ultimately to healing and to connection. We've had that experience innumerable times where the pain of the loss is so overwhelming at first that it becomes benumbing, where an individual, has lost their father or lost their child and hasn't been able to cry, hasn't been able to integrate what has happened with what went before or what is to come. And they're just lost, stalled out there in that moment that they can't get through or beyond. It is a kind of hell. It's the worst type of isolation. And then they see their loved one laid out in this casket that was particularly crafted for them, that somehow touched upon the history or the personality or the individuality of that person that meant so much to them. And they begin to find a way to live that sorrow, to embrace that sorrow, to connect with other people around him who share that sorrow, and then to ultimately find their way through that sorrow.